who referred to a question that I and the organizers had sent to the panelists, which I probably should have let you in on. We asked them to focus on, of course, I believe in free speech. It's my occupation, to study it at least, so they can say anything they want. But what we did ask them is to, and as Mr. Pellet referred to, is what do you think is the greatest obstacle to security and peace in the Middle East, and then to give one concrete solution to overcoming this obstacle, or to otherwise to promote security and peace between Israel and her neighbors. So that was the question we gave them that I thought I would let you in on, which would have done before. And now we will hear from Professor Long.
The philosopher Immanuel Kant notes in one of his essays that wars and destruction and the destruction that they cause are part of nature's plan, or is it nature's secret plan, to lead human beings into the realization of peaceful options that they could have realized before the war and before the destruction. When I teach this essay, I illustrate Kant's claim when I give the students to read an op-ed written by the famous Israeli novelist that Rabbi Allouche already mentioned, Amos Oz, which was written in 2002 after one of these cycles of violence that we actually have these days. And here is what Oz writes. History will never forget the offenses of both sides, and I'm quoting, because the solution is here, visible, manifestly clear before us all. Every Israeli and every Palestinian knows that this land will be divided into two sovereign nations and become like a semi-detached two-family house. Even those who lose this future already know, deep in their hearts, that all this is inevitable. End quote. I think that Oz is right. However, my intention in the few minutes that I have today is not to defend a two-state solution or discuss the details of any solution. Instead, I want to reflect on the social dynamics that prevents the two sides from reaching an agreement whose contours are fairly known. I want to present a model of the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. The models try to capture the dynamics of reason giving related to the conflict. It is not about this or that politicians, or this or that group, but about the terms under which we engage, with each other and with the other side. This model is very simple. It is even simplistic. It ignores much of the complexity and much of the history, and it assumes false symmetries between the two sides. But I think that even though it's a very simplistic model, it's also very helpful, and I would like to give it a run. So let us assume that each side has two parties, extremists and moderates. For the sake of simplicity, let's assume that they are divided into these groups by the extent to which they are willing to compromise with the other side for the sake of reaching peace. In some more philosophical terms, I think that the willingness to compromise is related to willingness to recognize the validity of some of the moral claims made by the other side. Now, the best strategy for the extremists is to portray themselves as moderates and to portray the moderates on the other side as extremists. They argue that we, from our side, are moderates even if sometimes we speak extremist language, and that they, from the other side, are truly extremists, and we should not confuse them. We should not be confused by their moderate language. Even if they have true moderates, the extremists say, these moderates are dishonest, or they are puppets controlled by the real players, the extremists who are really pulling the strings. Now, the moderates also have incentive to ally with the extremists. They are willing to compromise and recognize the validity of some of the moral claims of the other side. But because they want to negotiate a somewhat better deal, they ally themselves with the extremists and their arguments, requesting that the moderates on the other side sympathize with their own troubles, on challenges with their own extremists. But what happens is that this rhetoric rhetorical strategies get a life of their own. Allow me to explain, and I'll illustrate by the philosopher Jan Elster talk about the civilizing power of liberal hypocrisy. Liberals may be hypocrites when they respect others. They're really afraid of the Muslim person sitting next to them on the airplane, but they silence their fear and act nice. They don't really think that African Americans are equals. They only pay lip service to the idea of equality. But according to Elster, this is not that bad. After time passes, the hypocrisy goes away and the sentiment remains. The hypocrites forget that the feeling is not real and end up actually treating African Americans as equal. And this is, I think, how we get not only African American presidents, but also a contender that is African American, which is what began as kind of hypocrite arguments ended up being real sentiments. In short, rhetorical strategies get a life of their own. They create a reality in which people live. In the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have the opposite process. The rhetorical strategies that I just described have uncivilizing effect, in that they convince people on both sides that the other side not have any valid moral claims that should be refugees. The arguments of the extremists have won the day, and it's become too easy to say good things about yourself and bad things about the other side. So the question is how to have a coalition between the moderates on both sides. It should be emphasized that this is not simply a question of how to reach peace, but also how to maintain peace, if and once it is reached. Even if an agreement is reached, both sides have an incentive to shift the course of transition to peace and blame the failure to the other side. So even if you sign a peace agreement, one extremist can destroy the peace because once they set violence in motion, every side has the incentive to blame the other side and to ask the other side to deal with the cost of the violence, of dealing with the violence. It seems to me that the best way to build a coalition of moderates is by strengthening the democratic public sphere. What I'm talking about are places or occasions in which people are asked to defend the claims that they make about their own intentions and actions, and about the intentions and actions that they attribute to the other side. I do not want to suggest that the boundary lines between the two communities can or should be erased. What I believe is that a sustainable peace can be possible only as an outcome of some strong coalition of moderates who acknowledge the validity of the moral claims of the other side. It seems to me that the institutionalizations of dialogues between the two sides can serve as a reality check about the amount of mutual suffering that the continuation of the conflict creates. To be sure, I don't think that there is anyone who failed to notice that the situation is bad. What more dialogues can reveal is, in my view, is the futile and ongoing nature of the conflict. So there is a peace that is achievable, and we are captured by our own rhetorical strategies and prevent peace that is realizable. Now, I know, and especially after the previous speakers, that my ideas and the idea of coalition of the moderates sounds anticlimactic and even boring. Not to mention the extent to which the call for dialogue is naive. It actually reflects my own pessimism about the short run. And when I discussed peace in the past, in events similar to this, I tried to come up with an optimism. Not anymore. I don't think that there are any political or social coalitions that can bring about peace. Maybe under some constellations of the international system, which I cannot even begin to describe, international pressure can push Israeli and Palestinian leaders by their ears and have them sign a peace document. But still, even if a political peace agreement will be signed, the extremists will be able to set the post-agreement agenda because they can try to shift, again, the cost of the transition to the other side. I think we have to think the long term, and I think the best hope for the long term is the building of strong democratic institutions that allow democratic tool formation that cuts across national conversation. In this respect, I think that in the long run, the push towards democracy in the Middle East and the social unrest in Israel is our positive development. And I also think that dialogues, such as the dialogues that we have here, even if they are limited only to Jewish voices, are important because they allow participants to vindicate, to ask others to defend the moral claims that they are making. In short, if I have to offer one solution with one word, it would be democracy. Thank you.